Hi, and welcome to the review of the day, which is for Altered States by Paddy Chayefsky? 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 I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. So, this rather cute book with its rather evocative image is one that I've had lying around for a while. It's a bantam from 1979, far from the first edition. It was published the year before, I believe. And I didn't really know what it was doing on my shelf, to be honest. In hindsight, I think probably this was one of the books that belonged to my parents, and it came out of a plastic tub of other things, including pelicans and some penguins, probably last year, and it's probably been sitting there mystifying me slightly whenever I see it ever since. But I kept it because it sounded a bit thrillery, a bit science fictiony, maybe a bit horror-y. It sounded like something I might want to read, and I finally did read it. Now, I have to admit that never having heard of the author, I had very low to moderate expectations for this one. I didn't really have too much hope. And if you're American, you might, well, by now be sitting here going, how can you never have heard of him? Well, apparently, Paddy Chayefsky was a famous and much awarded American playwright and scriptwriter. So he was born in 1923 and he died in 1981. American playwright, screenwriter, and novelist. As far as I can tell, this was his only novel, and it also became a movie. But I haven't seen the movie, so I've got no real opinion. According to Wikipedia, Paddy is the only person to have won 3 solo Academy Awards for writing, both adapted and original screenplays. He had a lot of awards, and he had a lot of shows. Not sure that I've ever seen any of them, but, you know, there's many plays out there and only so much time, right? So what does this book have to say for itself? A 20th century Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the ultimate novel of mind-chilling horror. That's probably why I kept it. I like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, on the back, we have further expansion of that dramatic outlook. The ultimate horror story. The story of one young scientist's terrifying experiment to find origins. Entombed, fed with a powerful hallucinogenic, he experiences finally the supreme moment of mind-chilling terror. Spoiler, he actually doesn't find it terrifying. He's actually quite excited by it. He likes it. So the rest of it is marvellous and exciting work of the imagination by a publication I've never heard of, remarkable suspense, a stunning entertainment, and I've got to say, I really did quite enjoy it. It does start with a young scientist called Jessup who marries a woman who is an anthropologist and whose primary use in this novel would appear to be there as the focus of Jessup explaining his background research, and then she goes away and then she comes back and everyone can explain to her once again what all the research is about. That seems to be the primary notion. But it's a good book. It's very well written. It's not only is it very well written, it's got a good plot, the narrative is nice, the scene descriptions is pretty good, and Paddy had this real skill for creating interesting characters, easy interesting characters. They're thriller, mainstream fiction type characters, but they're very adequate. And for having a number of those characters in the same space, having a conversation, or in a social scenario where conversations build the actual narrative. And he was so good at this, that's the reason I eventually went and Googled him, because this didn't read like a first novel. This read like someone who was very experienced. And by the 70s, this person was very experienced at writing. He just, I don't think, had read too many written any novels before. So into psychology and enjoy 70s writing, there's a lot here that you can enjoy. Essentially, this horrifying ultimate horror story is actually, Jessup is researching a whole heap of things, including the sensory deprivation tank. And then he goes on an expedition to South America. He visits with a tribe which use a combination hallucinogen to have their version of a religious experience. Anyway, there's this particular drug combination that they use, and Jessup ends up bringing a sample back to America, replicating it with a pharmacologist friend, and then testing it on himself. The novel takes a while to build up to it. It builds up to it by showing Jessup as essentially, if this book was written today, I think we'd consider him on the spectrum. He has difficulty with human emotions. He isn't terribly interested in them. He gets married mainly because the woman in question is in love with him and wants to. And he's up front. I think her name's Emily. He's up front with her. He says, look, we could get married, we could have kids, we could do all the normal things, but I'd just be pretending, in the same way that when I teach, I don't love teaching. I want to be good at it, so I try and do it well, but I don't feel it. I won't feel it if I marry you either. But she really wants to, so they eventually do. And I actually found the development of Jessup's character considerably fascinating, because rather than creating an ultimately sympathetic and relatable character as our main event, Paddy didn't bother with that. He created a really interesting but detached character. So he could do all these really stupid things, and all these difficult things could happen to him. And we could be intrigued and involved and interested, but without that emotive connection that most popular books would strive to achieve. Anyway, 70s, I think it's actually set in the 70s. It does tell us when it's set. Bethesda, Maryland, 1965. Okay, it's set in the 60s, which is when various hallucinogens were big on the investigation market. So LSD and sensory deprivation tanks for consciousness research are definitely a thing in the era of the book. And there is a lot to this obsession. We hear from Jessup himself that his early origins were heavily religious, and that he lost his faith when his father died. But ultimately, as his wife keeps telling him, he has got that religious mystic basis. He's looking for answers. So when he goes down to South America, he participates in this religious experience where the shaman actually tells him exactly what's going to happen. At first he'll get nauseous, then he will see all these things, he will experience the universe as it were, and then come in contact with the primeval. And we hear throughout that our main boy Jessup here, he really, really wants to solve the mystery of life, the universe and everything. No one's told him it's 42 yet. So he brings this drug back and starts investigating it. Him and his friends Parrish and Rosenberg do a lot of that through rats. Content warning, many rats die in the course of this book, but we don't have to see it too closely, so that's something. And finally, experimenting on himself in a deprivation tank, it brings us to the crescendo, if you will, of the whole story, when more exciting things happen. So up to here, it's no spoilers. And I actually think this is quite an enjoyable book. I think in terms of mind-chilling horror, it's not mind-chilling to me. I don't read that much horror. There's a kind of horror-ish element. I can see that as a movie, it would definitely work as a horror. But as a book, it's just kind of entertaining and amusing. Okay, that's the no spoilers spot. From now on, I'm going to mention a few things that happen later in the novel. If you haven't read it or watched it, apparently many people have seen this film. Don't know how I never came to. Oh, I will say, and a few other people that I've since been watching online also say that it's, as a novel, it's underestimated. It isn't quite science fiction. There's a science fiction element to it, but it's a science fiction that's unusual in that it uses the soft sciences. It uses psychology. Anthropology is big in here. Toxicology and those other softer ologies, biology sort of things, to give a science fiction element and this horror tinge, if you call it horror. I really do enjoy it. I think that it is science in that most of the characters in it are scientists, and they keep talking about it as being measurable sensory applications, and they research it using biological mechanisms like x-rays and blood sample, as well as the poor old rats. And I like that. I like the fact that it was being researched in a science type way. I thought that made it much more interesting than if it was just all metaphysical and paranormal and woo-woo. I do like woo-woo. I just thought that this methodology was far more effective. So between the overall theme, the good characterization, the very skillful writing, I would say this is probably an underrated book, because not too many people seem to have read it. And I certainly hadn't heard of it. So yes, Altered States by Paddy Chayefsky? Not sure. Do recommend. Bird recommends too. But now, on to spoilers. Would you like to come? Would you like to come and join the expedition? Always with the heads. Okay, so Sir Chirpness has joined us. Come on. Yes, look at yourself. Aren't you a beautiful bird? Can you see the bird? Can you see a reflective bird? Chirp, chirp. Chirp, chirp. There are cats out there watching you. He doesn't mind. He likes cats. Okay, in terms of spoilers, once Jessup starts researching this drug, he's injecting it into himself in higher and higher dosages. And some of his science friends aren't too happy about that, but they are still participating. As the dosage increases, he keeps on going back to the same sort of inner exploration, I suppose, that he did while he was in South America. And that inner exploration includes this strange psychedelic experience of going back in time. Now, what Jessup is really searching for is, I guess, a god, a deity, a meaning for everything. But what we perhaps see in that is more an inner space exploration, and certainly not all of his scientist friends are equally on board with this god exploration, which gives a nice sort of balance for those readers who are not as into it either. Eventually, this is totally spoiler territory, all this drug accumulation seems to be doing something strange to him on a basic biological level. And that's when physics comes into it, and the author starts talking about altered states of physics and how physicists don't see solid matter as solid so much as an agreed upon arrangement of electrons and atoms. And we do get a bit of science exploration as how it would be possible for Jessup to go into an isolation chamber full of drugs, and within, I think it's about 4 minutes to half an hour, biologically alter, because that is ultimately where the horror element of all this comes in. Jessup alters, and eventually, first of all, he alters in small ways. Like in one of his sessions in the tank, he comes out unable to speak, and x-rays reveal a whole heap of features in his throat and epiglottis. I think it was the epiglottis, but a few other things that are more consistent with other primates like gorillas who don't have the foundation of language. And in fact, he comes out of one of those sessions making clicking sounds after having experienced the I'm going to say hallucination of being way back in time on the African veld with another whole group of other small proto-humans / simians that are hunting. He comes back from one unable to speak, and when his wife returns from Africa after a trip struggling gorillas, they find that the clicks and noises that he's making are remarkably similar to the sounds that she was analysing in her gorillas. So there's that. Eventually, he becomes proto-simian in a bigger way. He's doing this on his own by now. He breaks out of the tank room, goes wandering the streets of whatever city this is. I feel like it might have been New York, but I'm not sure. He ends up in the zoo chasing down a Smith's gazelle, I think it was, and consuming it. That one's getting a bit gorier and a bit bloodier, and certainly as a movie it would make a very effective screenplay time. At that point, he brings in both his friend Parrish, who's another scientist at the same university he is, his friend Rosenbaum, I think it was, who was the pharmacist, and by now his wife's back from Africa, and they all get together to watch this final manifestation, because he comes back to them saying, I actually physically transformed into this proto-human ape-like. Fur is on me. I hate saying these words because I know how unscientific all of this really is, the way it's being described. But anyway, that's what he's calling it. He wants evidence. He wants the three scientists that I mentioned to come, observe, record, take all sorts of biological samples to prove essentially that this thing that has been happening is happening. And they do that, and it goes even weirder than that. And the actual ending, I'm not going to reveal. It's more metaphysical than science, and it's pretty explosive. Anyone who's read it, I think, will agree that explosive is the word. And it's actually quite enjoyable. Having done all the things that he has done, there's not too much of anywhere for Paddy to take Jessup. So as endings go, it was actually quite good. I did really enjoy this book. I think it might be a 3.5, maybe a 4 out of 5 read. There are some things I didn't like about it. It's a little bit dated, not nearly as badly as most 70s books have dated. Certainly not mainstream 70s books often date very, very badly for me. This one isn't too bad. It's a bit dated. Attitudes, behaviours are things that wouldn't be written that way now. I do like the fact of how many of his main characters are scientists of one kind or another, and I like the way that he wrote them and behaved with them. The treatment of women is only a little bit uncomfortable and dated. Not too bad. As I said, Jessup's wife, which I think was, again, Emily? Was it Emily? It might have been Emily. Is more of a foil for the author to use to tell the readers what's happening than anything else. But for all that, she's not a bad character. I didn't love what was done with her. Inserting screaming women that have to be given sleep relaxation pills before they can deal with the situation is never going to be anything but a wince to me. But, you know, 1970s, they are what they are. The ending I found adequate. And like I say, I'm not really quite sure what else he could have done by that stage. So it was adequate. It was an ending. You've got to admire that. In 2025, with many authors writing books that never have an ending, they just stop. This ending was at least deliberate, intentional, and quite strong. So that was good. I do feel it could have been wound up a little bit more tidily, but okay, could be worse. The level of metaphysical seemed to be unnecessary. I would have been more interested in a inner space type solution rather than whatever we have here. I suspect that what he does is reaching further into the paranormal and mystical, and he's expecting his readers to go along for the ride and follow him where he's taking it. I didn't quite follow where he was trying to go with that personally, I don't think. But, you know, still a good book. If that's what you're doing, that's what you're doing. The narrative is fast moving, the writing is good. It's a little bit corny, especially in the ending, but in every other way, it's a perfectly adequate book. I don't know why more people haven't heard of it. Maybe they have. Maybe it's just me and I'd never heard of it. But I will also put out there that there's not an awful lot of reviews on Goodreads. Goodreads being my main non-statistical way of figuring out how popular things are. It's got 90 reviews, which, considering that it's been around for a long time, doesn't seem like quite as much as it deserves. And considering that the 3 or 4 of those 90 reviews that I looked at mostly seem to be interested in mentioning the movie or comparing the book with the movie, I feel that the book on its own stands perfectly well. Anyhow, tell me if you've heard of this book. If you're American, maybe if you've heard of the author. I am interested to hear people's opinions about this who have read it, because like I say, no one I actually physically know has read it or heard of it. So yes, anyway, this was Altered States by Paddy Chayefsky, and I'm very pleased to have finally read it, and I'm going to hang on to it, and I might even read it again sometime. Thank you for watching. Read good books.